Logan. Logan is turning exactly 1 year old today, and I thought I'd talk about it. Let's just get one thing out of the way though. Logan is not a traditional comic book movie. Logan is a post-Western film. This is not an average superhero movie. In fact, it's not even a real superhero movie. This is through and through a Western that uses superhero characters, kind of in a similar vein to how The Dark Knight has Batman characters in it. In fact, I would venture to say that this is probably the best movie to use comic books characters since The Dark Knight. The premise of Logan. In the near future, almost all of the mutants are dead. A weary Logan cares for a dying Professor X in a remote location on the border of Mexico. His plan to hide from the outside world is upended when he meets a young mutant who resembles him. Logan, reluctantly, must now protect her and take her under his wing as they try to flee the country. Alright, so let's talk about the cinematography of Logan. Logan, again, is a post-Western, so let's kind of define that a little bit. A post-Western is a film that takes the structure of a Western, such as having a character inhabit maybe the wild, so they're a cowboy, they're a part of this kind of Western front. A post-Western views characters that are used to be more in their element are now kind of out of their element, a fish out of water kind of take, where the cowboys in the West were these kind of rangers, this was kind of their land, they were the heroes. In a post-Western, they have no place in their environment anymore. They are displaced. Things and story structures that were used in Westerns now don't fit the same mold as a post-Western does. This applies very well to Logan, because Logan, who is reluctantly a part of a family at first, is now removed from his family, the X-Men, and is now just seen as a relic of the past where the X-Men were popular on Earth in the 70s and 80s. The film takes place in the future, where Logan inhabits a world that doesn't care about him. It has moved past him. This is very much a post-Western that commentates on how the world has kind of moved past comic book characters, much like Westerns and post-Westerns. They moved past the cowboys as the heroes. There's even some like standoff with characters, you know, like in an old Western when one character would be on one side, one character would be on another, then they quickly point out their guns and shoot at each other. There's kind of a moment like that, and it's framed not the same way as a Western. It is still framed similarly to kind of like a gun shootout would be in that situation, or a standoff. And I like that there are just so many visionary allusions to the genre, and how the superhero genre has kind of taken the same popularity as Westerns used to be in their heyday, like full pun intended. If you're expecting this to be like a comic book movie or, a Marvel movie, the cinematography is definitely a step above, but I wouldn't say it's absolutely incredible. It's definitely good, it's just not, I think, as good as it could be sometimes. Let's talk about the screenplay of Logan. This is probably the most creative way of using comic book characters, especially if you're trying to make a Western-like film. I definitely commend James Mangold for writing the characters in this way. It's definitely more creative than any of his past works, and definitely more creative than any of the Disney Marvel films. Kind of one of the weaker aspects of the screenplay is definitely how it uses exposition. You learn things through like a smartphone, like Logan will find a smartphone and he'll watch a video from that, and that kind of clues you in on what's been happening and how the characters got here. Exposition is kind of told through a radio, like, oh, all of the X-Men died because of this, and it doesn't feel natural. One thing I do really enjoy is the theme of nature versus technology. There are several scenes with a farmer character, this farmer family who has problems with a technology company, with the water company exploiting their farm and the land. There are a lot of new mutants who are just grown in a lab versus Logan, who is a naturally born mutant. In fact, some of the characters have metal arms. None of the protagonists use technology to their benefit, only the antagonists do. In fact, the ending of the film includes characters escaping into the forest versus being captured and sent back into a lab. So it's very explicit. One of the more interesting aspects, the commodification of the world of Logan. All of the mutants are copywritten. They're just aspects owned by a company. A lot of things in the world have just been commodified. Things that you thought were free, like being a mutant. That's something that these characters were born into that a company shouldn't be able to control, but a company does control that. So I think this screenplay's use of commodification, so many characters reference it. One character says to a mutant, like, oh, he's not a natural screw-up like you. This mutant was made in a test lab. It's a copyright running around and wreaking havoc on the world. You know, like, explicit dialogue like that, I think, is fascinating. One of the most interesting parts of the screenplay I found was that Logan eventually finds a comic book about the X-Men. This movie just really commentates on the comic book movie industry, about how, Logan describes, oh, this comic book is fake. It doesn't really mean anything. They made it up. All this explicit dialogue talking about comic books in a Western movie using comic book characters is so fascinating to me. And it really portrays how the comic book heroes aren't really heroes, which is kind of a bold move to make in a Hollywood market dominated by 3 or 4 comic book movies a year. So I really enjoy this kind of break from form. All right, let's talk about the editing of Logan. It certainly works here. Scenes flow really, really well. For instance, Logan might look at a bar in one scene and then immediately transition. Logan is already inside the bar, he's drinking. Things like that are really nice. The fights are really excellent. There are these large-scale battles that happen. Continuity is kept really well, so when a character leaves the frame, it cuts back, it cuts to another frame, and they're like digging their claws in there. It all sounds like I really enjoy the killing aspect, but please don't get that impression. All of the editing feels really smooth. I don't think there are any scenes I would take out. It certainly doesn't feel like a long movie. Alright, let's talk about the sound design of Logan. There's some really nice ways of scene transitions using sound editing. For instance, you'll hear a train in the background. Characters will reference the train, like, oh, don't worry, that's not the enemy, it's just like a train. And then it'll transition to a scene where the characters are in a car. And these two sounds aren't the same, but they sound really similar, so it's not jarring or kind of weird to jump to the car. It all feels very cohesive. It feels natural to have transitions like this. There is one really great scene with Charles Xavier. The way that the soundtrack is used, the score, it's very peaceful. He's having this conversation with Logan, and then as the camera kind of reveals what's actually happening, the music changes in conjunction with that. Again, kind of like the last point, this is nothing new, but it's used so well, and it really brings up the stakes of the scene. Alright, let's talk about the performances of Logan. Everyone is fantastic in this movie. I cannot get over how great Hugh Jackman does as his last time playing the character. It's such a great send-off. He does such a great job. Alright, X-23 is played by Daphne Keane. I'm assuming this is her first movie because the credits say introducing Daphne Keane. She is absolutely incredible. Throughout most of the film, she doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but then an hour in, you're just like, bam, she has dialogue, and all of her performances up from that point are absolutely incredible. Just nails it, ball out of the park, sports ball. They're really great. Everyone does great here. Alright, let's talk about the production design. There are lots of great details in the production design. For instance, this film takes place in the future, but not the far future. It's only like 10 or 12 years from now. And I like that all the technology used is kind of futuristic, but not, oh, there's flying cars everywhere. It's futuristic, but there's also a lot of familiarity with a lot of the props used, like cars don't look futuristic, and it kind of just all falls together really nicely. Costumes are all Western themed. Logan wears flannels and kind of a jacket like this. He also wears a tank top, and Professor X wears a cowboy hat at one point, and X-23 is wearing a jean jacket. But all of the costumes really fit the setting of this kind of comic book Western, but also in the near future where clothes are still clothes. It's not They're not gonna change that drastically in 10 years. I like how everything in the future isn't shown to be this perfect utopia. It kind of looks a lot like today, just slightly better. I really enjoyed the use of color. In fact, there's a special noir version of the film where I think colors, I wouldn't want to say pop out because it's a black and white cut of the film. All of the protagonists are easy to identify just color-wise because they're usually wearing lighter colors. Logan near the end of the film is just wearing a white tank top versus the antagonists who are all wearing black or they're wearing darker colors. It's really easy to identify who is good, who's bad, and sometimes some characters wear black and white and it's a weird mix. Logan is a Western film that depicts the death of the comic book hero and the comic book genre. This is an incredibly just powerful move to make, again, just in an industry dominated by year after year pumping out comic book hero movies because they make money. And I really love how Logan, despite maybe the dialogue you hear in the movie, does break the mold. It does kind of, its commentary is very different than any other movie that uses the comic book character license. And I love this. It really makes me think about it. This film came out a year ago, and I'm still thinking about it today. And that's why I think it's just a great piece of art, because art should make you think. It should make you question how society is working, how your life is, how culture works, how art plays into culture. And this just continuously makes me think about that. I really enjoyed this movie. I think that there are a lot of interesting cultural aspects that tie into how this movie commentates on the current comic book industry. And for that, I think I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. This movie was not perfect. There are some, again, kind of like the exposition, some of the cinematography wasn't as great as I think it could be. But there are just so many interesting facets of this movie that kind of blend together to make this cohesive movie that's in some ways really traditional through its structure, but used so creatively that it makes the commentary about its subject very interesting, more so than any other movie in the genre, I'd argue. Even maybe more than The Dark Knight at some points. And I really think 10 years from now, maybe in 2029, when people are watching this movie, I think it will still hold up. Kind of like how The Dark Knight still holds up today. My name is JR. I have a lot of hair, and I like movies. I'll see you next time.